You found the skeleton. How would you calculate that distance? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, Brian Nichols was telling us how, because laboratories aren't available for like 20,000 years, that means that granite can't be igneous or some nonsense like that. I don't really know. It didn't make any sense to me. And look, I'm gonna level with you. It's just after midnight, after my day off. I've had some booze. I'm tired. But you know what? I need to get this done, because I'm not getting it done in the morning. So, hey, here we go. Brian, you're up.
The evolutionary model then states that over time, the remaining inner molten materials were gravitationally separated to form the dense, solid inner and outer cores of the Earth. Note that any thermal analysis accounting for all realistic forms of heat generation and heat transfer predicts that the sphere of Earth should have completely solidified by now if it is actually 4.5 billion years old.
Unless, of course, there is something adding heat to the system. Now, what could that be? What exists under the ground that produces heat? Radioaltimetry? No, that can't be right. Radioconductivity? Close, but that's not it either. Oh, right, it's radioactivity. There's radioactive stuff in the Earth that keeps it hot. If only this weren't something that we hadn't known for a century. When the trillions of decay events that go on all the time in the mantle occur, where do you think the energy goes? It turns into thermal energy. You can't use simple thermodynamic equations with constant thermal energy assumptions to calculate the time to thermal equilibrium for the whole Earth. It won't work, because new thermal energy is added.
This is one of many observations which strongly indicate the upper limit of Earth's age is much younger than assumed when relying on radiometric ratios.
No, it's one of many observations that young Earth creationists will ignore basic high school science anytime it's convenient. Also, the fact that you're referencing radiometric dating means you know radioactive elements exist and are part of the standard model of Earth's formation. So why are you ignoring them in your heat calculations? Besides, it's convenient for you? Oh, no reason. Got it.
To further investigate the fundamental problems with radiometric dating, please refer to my other video titled Hydroplate Theory, The Origin of Earth's Radioactivity.
Dude, you titled this video Hydroplate Theory Overview Part 1. I'm not going to watch the other parts of your video for background to this video when you labeled it as Part 1. If you don't want to bother addressing it in this video, I'll just assume that you can't, which, to be fair, I'm pretty sure is what would happen if I did watch your other video. Since even when the pros at the RATE team tried to discredit radiometric dating, they couldn't, and concluded that it worked unless they assumed miracles. Since the best young Earth creationism has done with actual funding and years of research is a shrug and pointing to a magic wand, I'm skeptical that some rando on YouTube has managed to figure it out, but doesn't want to tell me in his intro video, and instead wants me to go watch some other video.
Evolutionary theory of the Earth's origin assumes that the Earth remained in a molten state for around 200 million years. Naturally, any water brought by asteroids would rise to the surface and evaporate long before the Earth's crust solidified. A runaway greenhouse would have followed, trapping solar heat in the humid atmosphere and making life on Earth impossible forever.
Wait, why? Says who? Water vapor is a good greenhouse gas, I'll give you that. But what modeling and math do you have to say that Earth would necessarily go into a runaway and irrevocable hothouse phase like Venus? Would it be none math?
According to some evolutionists, millions of years after surface solidification, comets bombarded the Earth, depositing even more water on its surface.
This part has largely fallen out of favor since it turns out that the isotopic ratio of the hydrogen and oxygen in Earth's water is not the same as in comets, meaning that they can't be the source of the majority of Earth's water. Although, surely, anytime one hits Earth, some of that water does end up entering Earth's bodies of water, but still, proportionally, this will be fairly minuscule. It seems that Earth's water is homegrown, and probably was there on those small planetesimals that formed it.
But recent discoveries of high deuterium concentration, or heavy water, on comets compared to Earth's oceans, have led some scientists to conclude that Earth's water could not have come from comets.
Oh hey, that's what I said. That's refreshing. Let's have more of that. Actual scientific accuracy. It's been thin on the ground so far in this video.
In summary, the evolutionary theories of how water came to be so prevalent on Earth's surface is not supported by what we observe today.
What? You have to actually argue for that beyond pointing out that comets probably aren't it. That's not the current idea. What about the water being part of the accretion disk Earth formed out of is contradicted by what we see today? Is this whole video just going to be badly reported versions of scientific models followed by bald assertions that those models don't work on the basis that you just say so? Dude, give your reasons for something. I'm begging you.
But if we assume the evolutionary theory is somehow true, then basic scientific principles tell us that Earth's water should only be found on the surface.
What? No. It tells us that that's where it should be primarily found in the form of actual bodies. It says nothing about the fact that it could be trapped as individual molecules in rock matrices, dragged down in what on a global scale would be small amounts of subduction zones, or that in areas of the crust it may seep into caves or porous rock.
What is surprising from this evolutionary view is that there are unexpectedly large amounts of water trapped at depths far deeper than surface water could ever seep. Here is why deep water under continents is not expected. Imagine a block of soft modeling clay or Play-Doh. Now stack more blocks of clay on top. Eventually the bottom block will deform sideways due to the weight of the added blocks. Add more blocks and more of the material deforms. Now imagine that you have stacked another column of clay blocks very close to the original column. What will it do? It too will deform and compress against the other material. The dashed line represents the boundary at which the compressive strength of the clay or Play-Doh has been exceeded. Material below this boundary forms a tight seal. Even small microscopic cracks cannot exist below this boundary line. Take notice that gravity is the causal source of this condition.
Got it.
Even if surface water is poured into the gap or crack, it cannot seep below the boundary line. For clay or Play-Doh, this boundary may be only a few feet from the surface. You've likely seen a similar scenario after making stovetop pudding or cheesecake, after it cools in the refrigerator overnight. The semi-solid separates or cracks at the surface as it cools, but the crack is not very deep because the weight of the material slumps and closes the crack at a certain depth. Rock like granite has good compressive strength and can support a crack of up to 5 miles depth, but no deeper.
Okay, I'm waiting for the ball to drop here.
In summary, assuming the evolution scenario, water from asteroids and comets collected on the surface before crust solidification.
No, it would be too hot. Water in bulk would be in the atmosphere, and some of it would enter solution with the lava at the surface because water is good at entering solutions with lots of things.
Since granite's max compressive strength is approximately 23,000 pounds per square inch, no significant continental water would be expected below 5 miles depth.
From seepage of surface water, sure, but what about water that's been dragged under a continent by subduction? Oh, we're just going to ignore that. Got it.
However, it is well known that deep water exists much deeper than this. Germany's KTB dig and Russia's Kola dig are the deepest man-made holes in Earth's crystalline continental granite. The goal of these digs was to reach the Earth's mantle rock, but neither succeeded. Both holes reached depths well below the 5-mile boundary of granite's max compressive strength. Both holes encountered unexpectedly extreme heat as depth increased. Even more surprisingly, they both struck saltwater-filled interconnected fractures in the granite.
Sounds kind of like what I just explained, doesn't it? Indeed, the source for this water is not believed by geologists to be surface water, but water from minerals.
More recently, using conductivity measurements, a mile-thick layer of saltwater-filled sediments has been reported 10 miles under the Tibetan Plateau. In fact, deep saltwater appears to be a common trait under all continents.
Let's take a look at that citation, shall we? It's a 1993 paper by R.D. Hindman et al. Published in Physics of Earth and Planetary Interiors. Let's look at the summary. Here are the first 3 paragraphs from it. Quote, surprisingly uniform low electrical resistivity is a fundamental characteristic of the lower continental crust, most regional measurements giving 10 to 30 ohm meters for Phanerozoic areas and 100 to 300 ohm meters for Precambrian areas. Numerous localized anomalies in deep resistivity are superimposed upon this background low resistivity. Most detailed studies have focused on local lateral variations. A different conduction mechanism could be responsible for at least some of the localized anomalies. We have summarized the observational characteristics of the conductive layer and found a number of important constraints. The two most probable mechanism candidates, saline aqueous pore fluids and grain boundary graphite, have been examined with respect to these constraints. The main problems with the saline fluid hypothesis are the required continuing source of fluids, the problem of keeping conductive and thus horizontally interconnected pore fluid in the lower crust, and the expected absorption of any available free water in retrograde metamorphic reactions. Most of the constraints discussed in this paper, however, can be accommodated by the saline fluid model, including the narrow range of lower crustal resistivities, the difference between Precambrian and Phanerozoic areas, and the uniformity of the lower crustal conductivity across major structural boundaries, the apparent temperature control to the top of the conductive layer, and the associations of other geophysical parameters. The graphite film mechanism allows a lower crust with dry granulite mineralogy. Some difficulties are the required pervasive reducing conditions in the lower crust for graphite stability, and the theoretical and observational evidence for restriction of most graphite to isolated grain boundary corners. However, recent sample measurements support the presence of thin graphite films on the rocks from the deep crust. The constraints discussed in this paper appear less well accommodated by the graphite model than the saline fluid model. The narrow range of observed resistivities and the difference between Precambrian and Phanerozoic areas are not easily explained. A restricted range of graphite amount and interconnection is required that changes with age. The correlations of depths of the conductive lower crust with present heat flow and temperature seem to require an association with the brittle ductile transition. A model for the breaking of graphite interconnection with uplift and cooling has been developed. Reconnection with increasing heat flow may also be required. The suggested correlations of conductive deep crust and seismic reflectivity, velocity, and attenuation are not readily explained by this mechanism." End quote. So here we have not an observation of vast saltwater reservoirs, but the possibility that within the pores and cracks of rock deep underground, there may be thin films of salty water, or there may not, and instead it might be graphite. This isn't exactly a slam dunk for hydroplate theory.
Hydroplate theory asks the question, if evolution theory does not predict deep water, then how else did the water get so deep under all the continents?
Evolutionary theory is about the diversity of living things. It makes no predictions about deep water. But other than there should be water, I'm not really hearing much in the way of actual hydroplate predictions either.
At this point, it is interesting to note that the Bible indicates in several places that water was and is under the earth.
How could people in the Iron Age have known that springs existed? I mean, I personally have found springs, but I live in like the 21st century where I can do things like swim in spring-fed ponds or hike. But people in the Bronze Age couldn't just swim or walk. They didn't have the technology.
Psalms repeatedly indicates this. The deep is in storehouses. The earth is founded upon the seas and upon the waters. The earth is spread out above the waters. Finally, and most telling, is the opening action of the flood recorded in Genesis 7 verse 11. The Bible strongly indicates large amounts of water were originally deep under the earth.
Yes, in the cosmic ocean, which also existed above the earth, because the ancient Hebrews thought the earth was inside a dome. In fact, early rabbis thought that the sun went through some kind of door at night, then went above the earth, but on the other side of the dome, and then back to the east, although Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, a 2nd century rabbi, said that this was probably wrong. The fountains of the great deep in Genesis directly parallel the floodgates of heaven, which are ways for the water above the earth to pour in as the waters from below the earth well up, both from the cosmic ocean. This is why Isaiah 40:20-22 says,
"It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to dwell in."
The circle is the circumference of the flat earth, and the heavens are like a tent in that it is a thing that covers over the inside, which has a flat bottom, such that when you look up from the bottom, you see the tent above you. And no, it does not mean sphere. Check a Hebrew lexicon. The verb with the same root means to describe or draw a circle. The noun is just the thing drawn when you do the action of the verb. Unsurprisingly, the works like Isaiah, the Psalms, and Genesis, being Iron Age works, have an Iron Age cosmology as their background assumption. Now, I don't think the Bible is trying to teach a flat earth cosmology, but it certainly, in the older texts, at least assumes one.
The hydroplate theory uses these biblical descriptions in combination with many real-world observations we've just covered to derive its starting assumption about the original layout of Earth.
No, it doesn't. It uses Walt Brown's imaginative reinterpretation of these verses as compatible with a globe-shaped Earth, which is ironic, since the only reason to bother being a young Earth creationist in the first place is a literalist reading of Genesis, and to a lesser extent, certain parts of the Psalms, Gospels, and Prophets, etc. Really, the ironic thing is that flat earthers have a more consistent hermeneutic than do young Earth creationists who aren't flat earthers. Taking the Bible at face value, there's really no option other than being a flat earther if you want to take it as your authoritative source of truth, and you also want a woodenly literal reading of Genesis.
Which is radically different than what we see today, and certainly much different than what uniformitarian theory proposes.
I feel like I've said this many times before, but uniformitarianism is not the current operating idea in geology in the present day. Instead, it has been replaced by actualism. Actualism acknowledges the existence of catastrophic events as important to the formation of many rocks. It also notes, however, that the formation of many other kinds of rocks, like evaporites, limestone, non-flocculated shale, etc., cannot be rapid because this is physically impossible given what we know of physics and geology.
The assumed condition is that the Earth's surface crust was formed above a deep layer of water.
Yeah, that's a problem on its own. What with that whole density tower thing that the Earth forms at this level of granularity. You can't get the crust just stably sitting on a subterranean ocean. That crust would more or less immediately collapse onto the water, which will come up, and there you go.
This is a global condition wherein the Earth crust was an unbroken spherical supercontinent which covered and sealed in a deep layer of water trapped between it and the mantle rock.
Oh, and this is evidenced by worldwide pre-flood terrestrial depositional environments that can be found around the globe, right? Oh, it's not? Sounds like an ad hoc idea with literally nothing to back it up. But you know who's not stuck in pre-flood deposits? My subscribers. So if you want to avoid being fossilized deep in the geological column, why not subscribe?
Many imagine that a combination of forces like the tidal pull of the moon, Coriolis forces, and centrifugal forces would somehow rip this shell apart immediately, and therefore hydroplate theory is invalid from its first assumption.
By many, of course, you mean basically all actual scientists and every young Earth pseudoscientist who isn't directly associated with the Center for Scientific Creation, which is basically all the young Earth professionals who aren't Walt Brown. I can't drive home how fringe this idea is enough. Young Earth creationism is already basically only differentiated from flat Earth by funding. And even in that far fringe of pseudoscience, hydroplate is so far on the fringe of that, it's like you gave your cowboy jacket's fringe its own fringe and then gave that some fringe. We're 3 recursions of fringe deep, people.
However, few can maintain such a view once they compare all these forces to the dominating gravitational force of Earth.
Fun fact, the force of gravity from Earth would basically not apply. You see, Isaac Newton himself already did the math on what force of gravity would be exerted by a hollow sphere of even density and thickness on objects inside the sphere. The answer is none. The forces from all sides exactly cancel out. Now, of course, the crust wouldn't have been a perfect sphere of uniform density, but at large scales, this would mostly even out, meaning that the net gravitational forces between the crust and the mantle would have been mostly nil. This means that other forces like tidal forces and Coriolis would indeed dominate in this regime. Those forces would all tend to reverse the situation. The model is not stable, and it's not stable on the order of hours or days, not the centuries needed.
Although other forces are present, they can often be ignored because they are so small compared to gravity.
You know, unless gravity is reduced to almost zero, as in this case. Plus, even if it were not, it would be a more or less constant force around the whole globe. So even then, the forces that are dynamic, like tidal forces, would in fact still dominate. That's why even today, despite the fact that the force of gravity from the Earth is orders of magnitude stronger than tidal forces from both the Sun and Moon, both of those have an obvious effect on water levels. That's why tides exist, and importantly, why neap tides exist. That is, tides when the Sun and Moon are more or less in a line and the tides are more extreme. You don't get to ignore this force. just because gravity is, in your estimation, much stronger. If that were the case, then all motion would have to overcome the magnitude of gravity. But that's not how force summation works. Summing forces is a vector math problem. If you have forces acting orthogonal to gravity, then it will cause effects regardless of that gravity. That is why you can push a very heavy ball with less force than the force holding the ball to the earth. This is like basic physics taught to preteens in the United States. That's the level of education needed to know this is nonsense. The average 12-year-old can find the problems with hydroplate theory.
There is a reason gravity is the first force we learn of in school.
You know, there's no uniform physics curriculum in the USA, never mind a worldwide one. I'm not sure gravity is the first force one learns about, although it's probably the first of the fundamental forces that one can name in most cases. But generally, I learned about various forces in the form of transfer of kinetic energy and Newton's laws of motion before I learned about the law of gravity in a formal sense, beyond it being the reason things fall. But sure, gravity is pretty basic, and it's pervasive, so it's not like it's unimportant.
As we discuss the hydroplate theory's many observations, take note of how so much of the theory's explanation is simply founded upon the physics of what happens to materials under the influence of Earth's gravity.
You know, even if those so-called observations are accurate, they'd happen immediately. Like, we're talking before Adam and Eve eat the fruit immediately.
Rather than speculation about unconfirmed natural processes or imagined miracles.
Literally, the entire basis of hydroplate requires an imagined miracle, simply because there's no natural way for Earth to form with a layer of water under the granitic crust of the Earth. The only way for it to be that way is a direct miracle, unless you've got some new physics for us, Brian. I'm glad that you wrongly think that after that initial miracle, that no further miracles are needed, but you can't present this model as if it doesn't require an imagined miracle for no reason. The whole thing is based fundamentally on a miracle, and therefore, even if it's true, it's outside the realm of science. But oh well, let's keep going.
We'll see hydroplate theory turn again and again to Earth's gravity as the causal mechanism which drove processes and produced various effects.
I mean, that I'll agree with, from what I know of hydroplate theory. It really depends on that potential energy from the granitic crust.
The Bible records further detail of these assumed starting conditions in the creation account of Genesis 1. The Hebrew for waters here is mayim, which is always used to describe liquid water. Many attempt to explain waters in verse 2 as if it is a frozen or gaseous vapor in space, but Hebrew does not use mayim to describe those states of water.
I actually agree here too. The waters described in Genesis and elsewhere are not a vapor or an ice canopy. It's a cosmic ocean above and below. But I notice, Brian, that you're ignoring the waters above the earth from Genesis 1:7. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. You know, because Genesis describes a flat earth surrounded by a cosmic ocean kept out by the firmament. Why are you not mentioning the waters there, Brian? Is it because even you know that taking the Bible so literally is silly? But if that's the case, you could just take more of it in a non-literal way and just accept science generally. But hey, I'm not your priest.
Hebrew has many other words to describe ice, clouds, and vapor states, so clearly liquid water is in view.
Okay, you've convinced me. Move on.
Then on the second day of creation, God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." The word rakia comes from the root word raka, meaning to spread, beat, or hammer out, as with a metal. It can also mean a plate.
Yes, like beaten metal. You know, a solid object.
The Septuagint translates rakia with stereoma, meaning a solid, firm structure. The Latin Vulgate uses the term firmamentum, from which the King James translators coined the term firmament. The implication is that the expanse was a solid, firm material.
Wait, Brian, we are in agreement on this? So you're actually saying that there was a solid dome over the Earth? Maybe you've been an intellectually consistent flat Earth creationist this whole time. I mean, if that's the case, then I guess props on taking the brave option of taking literalism seriously.
Again, mayim is used in verse 6, so day 2 seems to describe a state where liquid waters from Genesis 1 verse 2 were divided in half and separated by a solid plate of material.
Right, but it's in the sky, because birds fly across it in Genesis 1:20. So it's not the crust of the earth, it's the sky. I'm now becoming concerned that you're actually reading a whole lot into the text that just is not there. That's what we call eisegesis in the biz of Bible interpretation. It's generally frowned upon.
Remember I said granite is an enigma and has never been replicated.
Yes, I remember when you asserted that, gave no citations, and then ignored that granitic magma is highly viscous. It was dumb then, and I'm guessing that whatever you're going to base on that idea will be dumb by inheritance of that dumbness.
Hydroplate theory proposes that this expanse material was a miraculous formation of a granite crust separating surface water from the waters of the deep.
A granite crust with birds flying in it. Yeah, that checks out. That's not incredibly stupid and flatly contradicted by basically every ounce of the text and every bit of our knowledge of ancient cosmology, Brian. If anything, this is somehow even stupider than Flat Earth. At least Flat Earth doesn't contradict the text it's based on. So this idea is not only physically impossible, it contradicts the very hermeneutical method that young Earth creationists claim to use. No wonder even the other young Earth creationists hate it.
On the third day, Genesis 1 describes the results of God's further direction to firmly position the somewhat unstable expanse and bring it to a more stable equilibrium. Hydroplate theory proposes that the granite expanse was deformed at many points around the Earth, which settled into the solid mantle foundation below. Naturally, the thicker and denser portions of the crust would sink to the solid mantle foundation, but because the volume of water trapped below the crust was fixed, the lighter and less dense portions of the crust had to rise out of the water. This is exactly what Genesis 1 verse 9 describes when God says, "Let the dry land appear."
And we have evidence of this folding, right? Because that would stretch the crystals in the granite. If this happened, it shouldn't be hard to find, and yet I see no citation of actual granite with such stretching. What you've described isn't what pillars are. You've described sagging in the crust, which happened apparently because God said so, and not because of any particular natural process. Pillars are identifiable, separate, and small structures which hold up some kind of larger ceiling. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky, but the impression I and others get is vertical columns of rock that hold the Earth above the cosmic ocean, not just a bump in the crust of the Earth.
The deformations raised the topography at the surface for dry land, and the depressions gathered surface waters, producing small seas. Again, Psalm seems to add further description that matches with this concept. Psalm 75:3, "It is I who have firmly set its pillars." Remember Psalm 33:7 said that God laid up the deep in storehouses.
Making Earth basically a grenade with the pin pulled. Good to know that no matter whether humans sinned or not, God had set the Earth up to just basically explode inevitably. I wonder how that corresponds to him having already made a perfect world. My definition of a perfect world doesn't really include it being a time bomb with a fuse that's probably like at best a few weeks. But even if it's only a few centuries, that still seems like a problem.
It is important to note that the pillars themselves did not support the entire weight of the crust. Most of the weight was supported by the pressurized water of the deep.
A topography for which we have no evidence, and also far from looking like a garden paradise, with so much less surface water, Earth would look more like Arrakis than it would like Kashyyyk. Rainfall comes from evaporation of surface water, and with less of that comes less evaporation, which means less moisture in the atmosphere. And more land means it's spread out over an even larger surface area in terms of land biome formation. That means that the world would basically be a global desert spotted with oases, where the oceans are. Further, with only low mountains, there would be little to break the winds formed as a result of convection cells, meaning that most of Earth would be constantly buffeted by sandstorms. Earth in this scenario, far from seeming very good, seems like a hellscape.
The stench of death.
With much of the water trapped under the crust, Earth would have had much more available landmass with many small shallow seas dotting the surface. Mountains would have been smaller than today.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
Hydroplate theory figures that approximately half of the water in today's ocean started out under the granite shelf, forming one giant supercontinent all around the globe.
Peanut butter theory posits that originally half of the world's peanut butter was trapped inside a giant asteroid, and we've been mining it for peanut butter ever since. Yay, I can make up unevidenced, physically impossible bullshit too. But with that, I can't handle anymore. So let's take a break for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit like and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, hit dislike and tell me why in the comments. Either way, I hope you subscribe with the button below this video and turn on all notifications with the bell icon. That way you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Bent Hovind, Tapioca Weasel, Denny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, San, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Veed, Eleron Teller, and Pat L. Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if the annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.